From reviving rock and roll music to being sued for more than $60 million. Learn how this British band skyrocketed to the top of the world and fell almost to the bottom in just 4 albums. This is the rise and fall of The Cult. The Cult is a classic band of the 80s. They're the fathers of classics such as Love Removal Machine, She Sells Sanctuary, Firewoman, and Rain. However, their popularity has not stood the test of time in comparison to bigger acts of the same decade, such as Bon Jovi, The Cure, Ratt, or even Europe. But why? How did their relevance disappear from the radar so easily? For us to understand this, we have to go back in time. During the early 80s, in Bradford, Yorkshire, there was a band called Southern Death Cult. The group played gothic and post-punk, which were highly popular at that period, in part thanks to groups like Joy Division, Killing Joke, and Siouxsie and The Banshees. Southern Death Cult was a good band. However, one member stood out from the rest. The singer, a barely 20-year-old boy called Ian Astbury. Astbury was obsessed with the beliefs, cultures, and traditions of Native Americans, so he would perform covered in war paint and with colorful feathers hanging down his ears. That passion began during his childhood when living in southern Ontario, Canada. After visiting the native reserve of 6 nations of the Grand River, the otherworldly essence of the natives was carved in Astbury's soul for eternity. Southern Death Cult enjoyed a noteworthy recognition as an underground novelty, but fate was expecting something else for Astbury, and for someone else. Astbury joined a guitarist called Billy Duffy. Duffy came from a group named Theater of Hate. Before that, though, he played in the Nosebleeds, which had none other than Morrissey as lead singer. The two tourists got out of their bands and formed a new one called Death Cult, a gothic post-punk project that released an EP and toured through Europe. Eventually, Death Cult changed its name to The Cult in order to appeal to a greater audience outside the gothic scene. In 1984, The Cult appeared in a UK television show called The Tube. Astbury proudly showed a face covered in white and red makeup. In the set list appeared Spirit Walker, the band's first successful single from their debut album, Dreamtime. Dreamtime was a good post-punk album, receiving mostly favorable reviews and good acclaim among gothic enthusiasts. However, the record was just a preheat training of what was about to come. As I said, Dreamtime was a great addition to the gothic catalog. But other than Spirit Walker, a few catchy choruses, and a warm, atmospheric sound, there was nothing that made it stand out. Dreamtime resembled Southern Death Cult too much. Something was missing, and that something was rock and roll. After moving to London, the Cult began the recording of their second coming, Love. Released in 1985, Love made their previous album's compositions look like they were made by kindergartens. Love was different. Love was unique. While it remained mostly as a goth album, it's undeniable the aggressiveness and vigor that some tracks presented in comparison to Dreamtime. Songs such as Phoenix, Love, and She Sells Sanctuary are faithful examples of it. Love was soft but rebellious. The album reached number 4 in the UK lists and remained for 22 weeks on the chart. Not to mention, the singles Rain, Revolution, and She Sells Sanctuary made it to the top 40. But the UK was not the only place where the Cult was gaining success. In the USA nightclubs, She Sells Sanctuary was blasting through the speakers and climbing to the top 40 singles list, too. A bright future awaited these British men in the world of gothic rock. Or at least it would have, if it wasn't for a genuine, bold, and risky move that transformed the group's essence forever. The 80s were packed with quality music. Synth-pop raided nightclubs, heavy metal governed the world, and MTV drowned viewers with the new glamorous hair rock style of Aerosmith, Kiss, and Def Leppard. But what about hard rock? And I don't mean hard rock of the likes of Bon Jovi, Whitesnake, or Van Halen with their fresh synthesizer compositions. I'm talking about pure and raw hard rock, like AC/DC or Rose Tattoo. Well, while AC/DC was still releasing material, their albums weren't nearly as memorable as Back in Black. Before 1987, many claimed rock was dead. Naturally, that year, Guns N' Roses released Appetite for Destruction, and rock was back on track. But some months before that top seller saw the light of day, the Cult released Electric, earning themselves the badge of the real hard rock saviors. The Cult went back to the studio to record Peace, a sequel to their successful hitmaker Love. Similar sound, similar style, similar essence, and similar audience. As people say, if it's not broken, then don't fix it. But while the entire band was working on Peace in the Manor studio, Ian Astbury was somewhere else. According to producer Steve Brown, Ian's body was in that mansion in Oxford, England, but his mind was somewhere in New York City. Long story short, Astbury was fed up with English post-punk. He couldn't stand reverb and chorus effects anymore. He wanted to sing blues and rock and roll, like his idol Jim Morrison did. Coincidentally, guitarist Billy Duffy was also having a problem with the soon-to-be Peace. Simple enough, he didn't like it. As Duffy said, the songs were okay, but excessively long. On top of that, there were too many things occurring simultaneously. If you listen to the Peace demos, you'll notice hundreds of layers of guitar effects, with Ian's voice behind this wall of sound. Peace was not clean and clear like Love, yet it wasn't powerful and rebellious. The new songs were forced, and the band hated that. Something needed to be done soon, and so they did. The Cult fired producer Steve Brown, then moved to the other side of the sea. In New York City, the Cult contacted a younger and barely known Rick Rubin. Nowadays, Rubin is famous for having produced the Red Hot Chili Peppers, AC/DC, Johnny Cash, System of a Down, Slipknot, Metallica, and Linkin Park, among many other legendary artists. But before the Cult, Rubin produced Run DMC, Beastie Boys, and Slayer. Noteworthy productions, but not enough to make Rubin such an acclaimed producer yet. In one way or another, Rubin was the missing link between the Cult's expectations and a tangible creation. Not only did he understand the group's vision, but overall he improved upon it. The Cult began the new album from scratch, giving the middle finger to audience speculations and adopting an AC/DC-like sound. Take it or leave it. This was not a new The Cult. This was the real The Cult. Some compositions were completely discarded from the Peace sessions, but a great majority remained after undergoing drastic changes. Love Removal Machine, for instance, kept the initial riff inspired by the Rolling Stones' Start Me Up, but the band added an ending that resembles Led Zeppelin's Heartbreaker. The opening track Wildflower also took AC/DC's riff of Rock and Roll Singer. Later on, Billy Duffy would apologize to Angus Young for such an obvious deed. Funnily enough, Angus said it was okay since every artist steals. Sure thing, ripping off and stealing are two different concepts in the world of music. On April 6, 1987, Electric made it to the record stores. It had no ballads, no piano or synthesizers, no trumpets, no acoustic guitars, no gothic elements, just 100% hard rock. It was unthinkable for a post-punk band to switch to hard so abruptly, but somehow the formula worked. The Cult made hard rock popular again and earned a new set of followers, especially in North American lands, where the album earned platinum certification in the USA and double platinum in Canada. Electric was successful but didn't make the Cult a massive act. That would be a job for the next album, Sonic Temple. So, the Cult burned itself and began from zero. They were reborn as a pure rock band. The Cult was ready for the next big deal. Or at least, they were after 9 months of inactivity. In a nutshell, when the Electric tour was over, the group simply couldn't stand each other. Or at least, they preferred to keep away from one another as much as they could. Naturally, life on the road is draining for musicians. This small detail was one of the first problems that would lead to the band's big downfall. In 1988, the USA was one step away from being conquered. All they needed was a new and ambitious album. One that would blend the Cult's early elements from Love with the newest rock and roll spirit of Electric. The right man for it was Bob Rock. Bob Rock has produced artists such as Bon Jovi, The Offspring, David Lee Roth, and Black Veil Brides. Most important, he's the man behind the legendary Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood and Metallica's Black Album. Chronologically, though, Bob Rock worked with the Cult before all these memorable artists I just mentioned. The Cult recorded Sonic Temple, which came out on April 1989. The title emerged from one of the song's lyrics, more precisely, Medicine Train, which appears on the album but only as a bonus track. Sonic Temple is packed with magnificence. The opening Sun King with its mystic shamanic intro makes you feel you're giving the first step on a journey of 1,000 miles. The heavier stuff is presented in songs like Automatic Blues, New York City, which has Iggy Pop singing the bridge, and the radio hit Firewoman, which reached the U.S. Top 40. Emotional parts with Sweet Soul Sister and the ballad Edie, Ciao Baby, helped the band appeal to an audience that wasn't fully integrated into rock music. And last but not least, the iconic Billy Duffy guitar sound reminded us of Love and Dreamtime, but in a much more powerful evolution. Songs like American Horse and Soul Asylum are clear examples of this. Sonic Temple didn't sound like Love, and it didn't sound like Electric, yet it was probably the cult album ever made to that day. And the most commercially successful, too. The band's tour had Matt Sorum on drums, who would later join Guns N' Roses in Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. Sadly, it was also the last time original bassist Jamie Stewart joined the band since he quit after the tour. Offstage tension and excessive alcohol consumption only aggravated the band's stability. From that point onwards, the group went down the drain. No matter how successful you become, nothing guarantees eternal glory in the music business. Ceremony demonstrates this cold reality. Sonic Temple's tour was over. Now, the cult had no bassist and no drummer. Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy were the only ones standing. The two were incredible musicians, and their chemistry at the time of writing quality material was unquestionable. So, Ian and Billy did all the job in Ceremony, having session musicians fill in the rest. However, there was a huge problem. The two couldn't stand each other. Yes, Astbury and Duffy's relationship was like a marriage where the couple has long ago divorced but still live in the same house. The recording process of Ceremony started wrong. The discrepancy was so strong that Astbury and Duffy recorded the album on their own. That is to say, the two never met in the studio. If Astbury did the vocals, Duffy stayed at home. If Duffy recorded the guitar parts, Ian went for a walk. Ceremony was released on September 1991. It was a faithful continuation of Sonic Temple, with noticeable similarities between the two. Wild-Hearted Son and Heart of Soul were successful singles, and the album even received platinum certification. But that wasn't enough. Ceremony was a blatant, undeserved failure. Underrated gems like Bangkok Rain or Earth Mofo were barely remembered, and even the greatest singles were nothing in comparison to previous classics. But there was yet another problem that put the final nail in the coffin. Ceremony's cover presents the picture of an Amerindian child with crystallized eyes and a brave and penetrating but innocent look. The photo was fantastic and suited the group's image and beliefs perfectly. Unfortunately, this picture was used without permission. The result? The parents of the boy sued the band for $61 million. If we had to pay this in 2023 adjusted for inflation, it would be $134,737,444 approximately. Insane! It's believed that neither the band nor the record company and manager had to pay in the end. However, the event earned the album some infamy, distracting the audience from what really mattered, the music. Before splitting up in 1995 during a tour in South America, the cult released an alternative experimental self-titled album that wasn't well received. Then it was the end, for a while. In 2001, the cult reunited, and with Matt Sorum back on the drums, they released Beyond Good and Evil. The band recorded 4 other albums between 2001 and 2022. They still play on gigs and tour the world, but they've never achieved colossal success ever again, as they did with Electric and the rock arena anthems from Sonic Temple. Nowadays, the cult is in the middle between being considered a legendary rock act and, ironically, a cult band. Their contributions to music have been of paramount importance, and while their name doesn't ring a bell as much as Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, or Whitesnake do, it's still a sacred one for rock enthusiasts.